Member for Chilliwack North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill 16, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act. As is often the case with the omnibus-style legislation, this bill touches on a wide variety of policy areas: justice, energy, housing, municipal governance, tenancy law, and public safety. That breadth alone demands careful scrutiny from this House, because when government packages contain so many changes in a single bill, it becomes more difficult for members to give each measure the attention it deserves and to ensure that British Columbians fully understand what is being done in their name. And let me say this at the outset: this is not a bill without merit. There are provisions here that the opposition has long called for. There are elements that respond to real pressures facing British Columbians, and where the government has taken steps in the right direction, we will acknowledge that clearly and directly. But there is also a deeper story here, because Bill 16 is not simply a routine statutory update. It is a quiet course correction. It is a government adjusting policies that were overpromised, underplanned, and disconnected from the realities faced by British Columbians. And nowhere is that more evident than in the changes to the Zero Emissions Vehicles Act. Madam Speaker, this bill spans multiple areas, and taken individually, some of these changes may appear technical or incremental, but taken together, they reveal a pattern: bold announcements followed by quiet retreats, ambitious targets followed by reduced expectations, and a government increasingly trying to manage the consequences of decisions that were not grounded in practical reality. The provisions aimed at reducing development cost charges are a step in the right direction. These costs have significantly increased the price of new housing across British Columbia, making it harder for families to enter the market and driving up rents for those who have no choice but to remain in it. For years, we have said that government-imposed costs are a major driver of the housing crisis. Builders have said it, municipalities have said it, families trying to buy their first home have certainly felt it. So we welcome any move to reduce those burdens. But we must ask the obvious question: why now? Why did it take a housing crisis of this magnitude for the government to begin addressing cost drivers that were identified years ago? And more importantly, will these changes go far enough? Or will they be applied selectively, inconsistently, and at the discretion of Cabinet through regulation rather than through transparent legislation debated in this House? Because British Columbians do not need partial fixes, they need meaningful structural change that addresses the root causes of unaffordability, not just the symptoms. Part 4 of the bill authorizes the use of proportionate force to ensure individuals in custody receive necessary mental health treatment. This is a difficult provision, but it reflects a difficult reality. Our correction system is increasingly dealing with individuals facing serious mental health challenges. In many cases, those individuals are unable to consent to treatment that is clearly in their best interest. Without appropriate tools, correctional staff are placed in an impossible position, responsible for care, but without the authority to ensure that that care is delivered. For that reason, we support this provision, provided it is implemented with clear safeguards, strong oversight, and a focus on dignity and appropriate medical care. We also note the creation of an investigation and standards office to oversee these complaints and ensure accountability. This is a positive step, but as always, oversight must be real, not just symbolic. The effectiveness of this office will depend entirely on how it is resourced and how independently it operates. Honourable Speaker, let us turn to the provisions that raise significant concern. The amendments to the Judicial Review Procedure Act expand the government's ability to designate documents as cabinet confidence and shield them from disclosure during judicial review. At the same time, they remove protections that previously ensured judicial review could not be denied solely due to the passage of time. Taken together, these changes make it harder for British Columbians to challenge government decisions and harder for them to access the information necessary to do so. Madam Speaker, that should concern every member of this House. Judicial review is one of the fundamental tools citizens have to hold government accountable. It is a safeguard against overreach. It is a check on executive power. And transparency is not an inconvenience for government. It is the cornerstone of democracy. So we will be asking, why does this government feel the need to expand its ability to withhold information? What decisions is it anticipating that it may need to shield from scrutiny? Because when governments reduce transparency, public trust is inevitably eroded. But the most revealing part of this bill by far is the government's retreat on the electric vehicle mandates. This bill cuts 2035 target from 100% to 75%. It removes the 2026 and 2030 targets from legislation, and it moves those targets into regulation where Cabinet can change them without debate or a vote in the House. This is not a minor technical adjustment. This is a fundamental shift in policy. And let's be honest about what that means. This is the government stepping back from its own commitments quietly and without clearly acknowledging it. This is now the second major retreat on EV policy in less than a year. First, the government cancelled the EV rebate. Now it is dismantling its own mandates. 6 years ago, this government made British Columbia the first jurisdiction to legislate EV sale targets. 2 years ago, they doubled down, setting aggressive benchmarks: 26% by 2026, 90% by 2030, and 100% by 2035. They described these targets as urgent. They described them as historic, and when concerns were raised, when we said these targets were unrealistic and disconnected from infrastructure and affordability, our concerns were dismissed outright. When our caucus brought forward legislation to repeal these mandates, the government voted it down. Now they are doing exactly what we said they would eventually have to do. The only difference is they're trying to do it quietly, tucked away in a miscellaneous statutes bill, rather than standing in the House and admitting that the original plan didn't work. What is even more concerning is that there is no clear replacement plan. The new regulatory framework will not be ready until fall 2026. Targets for the coming years depend on federal policies that have not yet been finalized. So the government is dismantling its own plan today without presenting a credible alternative. And then it asks British Columbians to trust them. Trust the same government that set the targets, defended the targets, missed the targets, and is now dismantling the targets. That's not a plan, that's a retreat. Madam Speaker, this outcome was not unpredictable. Analysts warned that aggressive EV mandates would collide with hard realities: insufficient electricity supply, massive infrastructure requirements, declining fuel tax revenues, and slower than expected consumer adoption. Those warnings were dismissed at the time, but now reality has arrived. EV adoption rose quickly for a period, but then it plateaued. Sales declined. The government eliminated the rebate that had supported adoption and then expressed surprise when demand weakened. As has been said, you cannot kick away the ladder and then blame people for not climbing. And while this policy unravels, it is British Columbians who are paying the price. Manufacturers that could not meet the targets faced difficult choices, raised prices, buy credits, or cut supply. That translates directly into higher costs and fewer options for consumers. Even now, as the government backs away from those targets, those structural pressures remain in place. So families continue to bear the cost of a policy that the government itself no longer appears confident in. There is also a fundamental issue that cannot be ignored. Even if every British Columbian wanted an electric vehicle tomorrow, the province does not have the power supply or charging infrastructure to support that level of adoption. That is not a partisan claim, that is just simply practical reality. Policies that assume infrastructure will simply appear after the fact are not sustainable. Infrastructure must come first. These mandates were built on the assumption that supply, grid capacity, and consumer readiness would all align on schedule, and they have not. And that is why we are seeing this retreat. These policies also failed to reflect the diversity of British Columbia. They may have been designed with urban centres in mind, but they were never realistic in rural communities in the north or in the interior, where distances are longer, conditions are more challenging, and infrastructure is limited. Families in those regions were left with fewer choices and higher costs. This bill restores some of that choice, but only because reality has forced the government to reconsider its approach. Madam Speaker, this is the broader pattern. Set ambitious targets for headlines, dismiss concerns, and then quietly adjust when reality intervenes. We are seeing that pattern again in this bill. Reality means aligning policy with infrastructure capacity. It means ensuring affordability. It means respecting consumer choice. And it means being honest with British Columbians about what is achievable and when. In closing, Bill 16 reflects a government that is finally being forced to confront reality. There are elements we support. There are steps in the right direction. But there are also serious concerns about transparency, accountability, and the approach this government has taken to major policy decisions. The changes to the EV mandate are not just technical adjustments. They're an admission that the original plan didn't work. The question now is whether government will learn from this. Because British Columbians deserve policies that are grounded in reality from the beginning, not policies that have to be scaled back after the fact. British Columbians deserve transparency, accountability, and leadership that is willing to get the details right. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.